I'm not going to teach you about the Holocaust. I can only share with you my own experience during almost 6 years of war in Poland. And I'm honored to be asked to share with you my experience. I did have a life before the Holocaust, although it was a short one. I was born in a small town in central Poland. I lived there with my parents. I was the oldest one. I had 2 younger brothers, and of course grandparents and aunts and uncles and host of relatives. And especially in a small town, even people I was not related to were like relatives, because everybody knew everybody and everybody's business, you know. I remember I used to go in the morning to school. Some of the storekeepers would sweep the front of the business. They would stop me, ask me how school was, how my parents were. Some of them liked to pinch my cheeks. Those I tried to avoid. I just give you an example how life was. I thought I lived a normal life. I attended in the morning public school, in the afternoon Hebrew school. Although I often argued with my father why I have to go to Hebrew school, because most of my friends were outside playing. My excuse was, I'm not going to marry a rabbi anyway. But I guess my father persisted. Because in those days, you see now the Jewish prayer books are translated into English. You don't have to know Hebrew to pray. In those days, they were not. Anyway, for some reason, 1 year before the war started, in 1938, my parents decided to move to a large city. I'm not sure if it was for business reasons, maybe cultural reasons. It so happened the city was not far from the German border. And as we all know, on September 1st, 1939, happened to be on a Friday, beautiful Friday, September 8th, Germany invaded Poland. That evening, my parents and their friends got together to decide what to do. They were convinced that Hitler would be stopped before reaching central Poland. They thought that England, France, Russia, and the United States would certainly intervene and stop Hitler. As it turned out, although England and France declared war on Germany, they were incapable to do much. And Russia, as you probably know, made a pact with the Germans to divide Poland among themselves. And as I mentioned before, the United States at that time was not inclined to fight somebody else's war across the ocean. So anyway, they decided to send the wives and the children back to their hometown, to that small town in central Poland. To tell you the truth, we kids were very much excited that we were going back, be together with our old friends and so on. So we all got dressed in the morning in our best clothing and went to the railroad station. The place was mobbed, everybody trying to get out. And we were worried we'll be separated from our mother, but somehow Father managed to put us on the train. You see, the men stayed back, because after all, when you have a business or a shop, you just can't leave it and walk away. We traveled to the next town, which was 5 miles away, 8 kilometers, and the railroad tracks in front of us were bombed. So you can imagine the commotion. We all got off the train, being afraid that the train would be bombed, but in the meantime we had air packages with us, and Mother was afraid to drop it in the street. My mother decided we should, since it was only 5 miles, we should walk back home. She convinced somebody, she knocked at somebody's door and convinced them to take those packages from us, and we walked home. Since I mentioned we wore our best clothing, I assumed we had new shoes. By the time we got home, our feet were blistered, but we were happy to be back home with Father in our own beds. And at the time we thought that's probably the worst thing that could ever happen to us. Little did we know what lay ahead. I mentioned that our city was not far from the German border when the war started on Friday. On Monday, the Germans already invaded our city. At first, I guess some shots were fired by the citizens. They took everybody out from that building, even people that were hiding in the bunker. The Germans took everybody out. And they shot everybody. Among them happened to be my uncle's brother-in-law. That couple married not long before the war. The same thing was repeated in a neighboring street. And in the afternoon, they ordered everybody to step out from their houses. They selected the Jewish men, lined them up in rows of 5, and marched them to the city hall. They put them in a windowless, airless basement, and they demanded that the rabbi should step forward or 10 Jews would be shot. It so happened the rabbi was not among them. But in order to save 10 Jews, an elderly Jew stepped forward. He said that he was the rabbi. They took him out, they beat him up, pulled out half of his beard, threw him back in, and ordered the rest of the men to say the mourner's prayer because they're all going to die. So you can imagine the expression on their faces. And in the meantime, the German soldiers were filming them, taking pictures, having a good time. The reason I know all this is because my father happened to be among them. They kept them overnight in the airless basement. In the morning, they walked them to one of the factories. They ordered the barbers to get home, get their equipment, and be back within 10 minutes so they would be shot. And they marched them to that factory. They shaved everybody's head and everybody's beard. You might not probably know, but for an Orthodox Jew to have his beard shaved was very painful. They selected some people to work. The businessmen they put in jail. Some of them later managed to get out for big bribes. The others were executed. Some people they released. The thing was, again, they didn't give them anything to eat or drink. We brought food, but there was a tall wall around that building. All we could do is throw the food over that wall. And it was getting already dark, and still some of us were waiting at the gate for our dear ones, not knowing if we'll ever see them again, but it was time to leave. And I remember we left that place, walking behind our mother. It was almost like walking at a funeral, because we had no idea if we'll see Father again. He did come home later. It seems that they detained some men to build latrines. But from that day on was not a peaceful moment. Any insignificant thing became a matter of life and death. Once, somebody in the next building where the Jews had to move out, it was a fairly new building, and the Germans moved in. One of them stopped hard on the street that he needed flower boxes for his balcony. And a few hours later, he came with the superintendent, drunk, with his gun drawn, that the flower boxes are not made. I remember each one of us in another corner of that kitchen, and he chasing around Father at the kitchen table. I don't know. It was a miracle that Father somehow convinced him that the flower boxes will be made. I just give you an example how every insignificant thing, our entire life depended on the sadistic attitude of the soldiers and the degree of the drunkenness. And from that time, we lived in constant fear. I mentioned that it was almost a miracle. It was almost a miracle if you got up in the morning in your own bed, because when you went out, you found out that your neighbors were taking you tonight for deportation. Also know that right away went out that they imposed curfew. And so her mother and a neighbor were standing in front of the house, and 2 soldiers went by and arrested them. Again, we had no idea where they were, if we'll ever see them. They spent the night in jail. Later, all kinds of orders went out. Jews had to move out from the main streets and could only take with them whatever they could carry. The Germans would come in, take inventory. Somebody maybe was lucky enough if he had a baby carriage or a cart to put some stuff on. Otherwise, you had to walk away only with whatever you could carry. Later, orders went out that Jews were not even allowed to walk on those streets. And to get from one place to the other, it so happened that our city was composed of 2 parts. It was the old city and the city. Orders went out, Jews had to turn in all their valuables, even radios and bicycles. And orders went out that Jewish children no longer may attend school. I spoke yesterday to a group of youngsters. Maybe in this area you don't get much snow, but in our area, when there is a snow day or there is a teachers' conference, usually kids are glad that there's no school. But believe me, it's different when you are told that you're not allowed to attend school. A Jewish committee was formed, but they were not there to help the Jews. They were doing the dirty work for the Germans. The Germans gave out the orders, and the Jewish committee had to execute whatever they told. Once the synagogue was burned down, only a few days after the Germans came in. At first we thought it was just a single incident. Later we found out the synagogues in the neighboring cities were also burned down. And since we were not far from the German borders, I mentioned that area right away became annexed to Germany. We became part of Germany. So in order to get around, you needed special passports, special papers. It so happened that right in the beginning, a lot of the young people ran east, either to get away from the Nazis or maybe be able to get away to Russia and save themselves. But a lot of them left behind wives and children. Some of them could not get through and wanted to come back, but they needed special papers. And apparently there were some people that were making false passports. So one day, 2 Jews were hung in the center of the city, and everybody that was on the street had to stop and watch. They were accused of making false passports. A few days later, 4 Jews were hung for the same reason. And among them happened to be a father and a son. And I think that evening in many Jewish homes, somebody lit a candle in their memory. And as I mentioned, that to get from one place to the other took a long time. But there was a streetcar that ran especially for Jews, but it ran unlimited time. My father happened to get a job in the other part of the city. And sometimes he was detained at work and had to stay longer. And he missed that streetcar that was for the Jews. But that time, we had to wear white armbands embroidered with the Star of David. So at great risk, you can imagine, he would remove that armband. But you can imagine how he worried that somebody might recognize you. And I simply cannot describe to you the anxiety every evening, sitting at home and waiting until everybody was safe at home. And life went on like this. Of course, the deportation kept going on. And our city was composed of 130,000 inhabitants. Among those were 28,000 Jews. But they also brought in the Jews from the neighboring towns because it was easier to control them. So by the end of 1940, about half of the Jewish population was already deported. And the Jews started thinking of a way to be useful to the Germans, make uniforms for the military or goods, and still be able to remain in their hometown. At first the Germans rejected it, they didn't want to hear about it. But later they realized that they could get big bribes, or maybe if they'll be needed here, they won't be sent to the front. They agreed. And in 1941, in March, they opened the first shop. I happened to get employment in that shop, but my parents had to provide a sewing machine. In the meantime, orders went out that Jews, instead of that white armband, had to wear the yellow Star of David. Those had to be permanently sewn on to the garments. Also, orders went out that every Jewish man received an additional name, Israel, and every Jewish woman, Sarah, and our passports were stamped with the letter J. All this happened to have, for some reason, on Jewish holidays. And I mentioned I got a job in that shop. That shop was producing uniforms for the Germans. Also the mustard colored shirts for the Hitler. The thing was, to get employment in the shop was very important. The pay was minimal. You could not survive on what they were paying. The only thing was they had that card. The German called it the Sondercard, which was an employment card. We called it a way to live. Because in the beginning, if they caught you on the street and you could provide that card, they would let you go. And that went out to fight. In the meantime, here we had a manager, a German, an elderly German. He was constantly telling us how lucky we are that we worked in that shop and we won't be deported, you know. But in January, you know, that was also March in 43, as our shift was about to leave, and the other shift was waiting to take over, the SS surrounded the building, and we were all taken for deportation. At that time, my parents and my two brothers were still at home. They came to that place where they were holding us. They brought me a suitcase with my personal belongings, but we could not really communicate because it was such a commotion. Everybody wanted to talk. We were on the second floor. But I so vividly remember my parents standing there, and I think right in front of my eyes, they aged maybe 20 years. I forgot to mention that I was 13 years old when the war started, and I was the oldest one. So you can imagine my parents were still very young. And I also assumed that each one of us had the same thought. Will we ever see each other again? And as it turned out, that was the last time I saw my parents and my two brothers. And from there, we were taken to a temporary camp. The buyers came to select us. We were taken to a factory It was actually a brand new factory. It was owned by private Germans. We were on a lease from the SS. That factory was producing soot, carbon. The Germans were in desperate need of that product because from that they were making synthetic rubber. And from the rubber, the tires on which the Wehrmacht or the military was running. So since it was a new camp, it was clean and so, we thought it will be a chance to survive. Well, soon the SS took us over. We became a subcamp of Auschwitz. We were each given, all our personal things were taken away. We were given those striped dresses, a pair of underwear, a pair of wooden shoes. And we had to go through showers. Our heads were shaved. And we had to go through inspection. And we had to go through naked in front of a bunch of assessment to have our arms tattooed. My number was 79357. But to this day, I cannot forget that embarrassment. Don't forget that that was so many years ago. In those days, a teenager was not like it's not teenagers now. To tell you the truth, I don't think I even got dressed in front of my own mother to take a bath. And of course, from that day on, we were not called by our names, but by our numbers. But believe me, they took away much more than our names. And also in camp, you didn't have to make any decisions. The decisions were made for you, but you still had to decide. When you got in the morning that piece of bread, should I eat it now or maybe save it for later? And in the evening when you got that bowl of watery soup, should I start to get in line ahead to make sure I get that bowl of soup? Or maybe wait for later and be lucky enough to find a piece of turnip or a piece of potato. But you sometimes ran out of soup. And we worked at that camp till January 1945. That's when the Russian army was coming closer and they decided to evacuate us. I was working that time on the night shift. We came back in the morning. There was a big commotion in camp. We are being evacuated. Nobody knew where to or what. We were each giving some provisions, some bread and a blanket. The only thing was I had to make a very serious decision. My best friend was that on the infirmary, and I had to decide, should I leave her there or take her with us? She had a high temperature, could hardly walk on her own. At first I thought maybe I should leave her. Since the Russians were coming, she would be liberated by the Russians. But there was also a rumor in camp that they were going to burn down the camp because they didn't want to leave any evidence. So I convinced another friend, she lives in New York now, and between the two of us, we took our friend out from the infirmary. And as I said, we each one got a blanket and some bread, and we walked to the railroad station. When we got to the station, there were no cars, no railroad cars. I don't know if some of you were in Washington and saw the railroad car that they were transporting people either to the concentration camps or to the gas chamber. Well, we were not put in a closed car like this. We were put in open cars, the ones like you transport coal. And that was in the middle of January. And the winter in Europe can get very severe. And all we had was that striped dress and a blanket. I had to take my friend in the corner of that car with my hands. I was holding on to the railing with my back trying to push away the crowd because we were very crowded, because she could not defend herself. And we kept going in those cars back and forth wherever we went. The railroad tracks were bound. I assume they used probably the better trucks to transport the military. Later I found out that our destination was northwest near Berlin, but for some reason we wound up in Czechoslovakia. And if you know geography, Czechoslovakia is for the south, on the south. The Czech people were nice. Some of them came to the railroad station where we were and brought water and bread, but the guards would not let them give it to us. They were even shooting at them. Sometimes the people went where there was an overpass and would throw down some bread to us. And we were going back and forth like this, back and forth. At one station, it so happened in the next car was the nurse from our camp. So at one of the stations, he climbed up on the railing with a tin cup and begged the guardsman for some water because somebody had fainted. And instead, he pulled out his gun and shot her. And she fell down between the two cars. And as I mentioned, the cars kept going back and forth. We saw her later, but not knowing if she was still alive or dead. And we kept going like this without any food or water. I think the snow that fell on our blankets served to quench our thirst. Later, the rest of the journey, I think, was at night. We marched, we wandered up in Ravensbrück. It so happened they could only put some of us in the barracks because it was the middle of the night. They would have to put on the lights. So the rest of us, they put in the showers. And knowing what showers meant, you can imagine how we felt. To this day, we recall sometimes how my friend and I were sitting holding on to each other and thinking, well, that's it. But for some reason, we went through the night, and dawn we saw the light coming through the cracks in the shades, and we realized that we survived the night. In the morning, they put us in the barracks. Ravensbrück was like hell. It was so crowded. There were 20 different nationalities. We slept together, I don't know how many people on one of those bank beds. And of course, I didn't mention that every morning, at dawn, even in camp, we were all always awake. You call it roll call, we called it appel, to be counted. And for some reason, they could never get the numbers right. They kept counting us over and over, and girls were fainting. We had to be supported. Well, in Ravensbrück, it was the same thing. We had to get up and down and run to the latrine, and on the way was like a fountain with dripping water. All you could do is reach out your hand to catch a few drops of water and apply to your face to wake up. But in the meantime, you were stepping on corpses, people that expired during the night. And I often tell, as much as we were young, and as much as we wanted to survive, but there were times that you just couldn't take it. You just wanted it to end, you didn't even care how. And I recall once standing in line in the Ravensbrück had crematoriums. They were wheeling by corpses, naked corpses. Only the skin was holding the bones together. And once in a while, one would fall off the pile, another one would fall off. They just picked it up like a piece of wood and threw it back on the pile. And I remember, although as I said before, sometimes you just wanted to give up. At that moment, I was standing there and saying to myself, no, I must fight. I'm not going to I don't want to wind up like this. Well, fortunately, we were not long, only a few months in Ravensbrück. From there we were sent to a smaller camp, also a sub-camp of Ravensbrück. Over there again, the sanitary conditions were indescribable. I think we spent every free moment trying to eradicate the lice, which we were unsuccessful. And one day when we were standing in the morning to be counted, one of the couples, that was a German overseer, and one of the soldiers walked up to the line and pointed a finger about a dozen, that was a small camp, a dozen or so girls to step forward. I happened to be among them. And at the moment, I took a quick look around me, trying to figure out, why me? How do I differ from the others? You see, a selection in camp never meant a better lot. If they selected you to send you away, that was it. Anyway, they marched us to the gate. Outside was standing a big white covered truck, and there were a lot of couples and the soldiers, and they ordered us to step onto the truck. Although the tailgate was down, but we were too weak to step onto the truck. So all of a sudden, a crate appeared for us to step on that crate to get onto the bus. We thought we were hallucinating. We just didn't believe. We never saw such a humane gesture from the Gestapo. Later we found out why. Anyway, we got on the truck. Each one of us got a care package. I think those were donated by the Canadian government. It was food. We didn't even know what it was. We tore it open. There was powdered milk and cocoa and sardines and crackers. We ate it all at once. We didn't care what it was. We didn't even care if that was our last meal. It was food. Of course, a lot of girls got sick. Our stomachs are used to such food. And we traveled in the truck, resigned. I think we didn't even talk to each other. I assume each one of us was thinking what the future will be, if there will be a future. And we kept going in the truck, and we landed in Copenhagen. You see, that white truck was from the Swedish Red Cross. And the reason the couples were so nice with that crate, they wanted to show the personnel from the Red Cross that they treated us humanely. This is a very little known fact. As a matter of fact, one of you told me when I mentioned it yesterday to a group of students that she never heard about it. Very few people know about it, because that took place the end of April 1945, when Germany was still at war. It so happened at that time, the chairman from the Swedish Red Cross, Prince Folke Bernadotte, he was a nephew of the king, was in Germany negotiating with Himmler, who was the head of the Gestapo, the release of the Danish and Norway POWs, because Denmark and Norway were occupation. And since it was the end of April, and Himmler probably realized that Germany had lost the war, Bernadotte insisted that he should relieve some prisoners from Ravensbrück. Later I found out that Bernadotte saved about 20,000 prisoners, and among those about 5,000 or 6,000 Jews. Well, when we got to Copenhagen, the people, the Danish people, were very nice. Although they were still under German occupation, they provided food and a rest, for us, a place to rest. And from there we went to Sweden, to Malmö. We got to Sweden. There was such a reception. There were clergymen, ministers, dignitaries, even the general public, everybody awaiting us. As a matter of fact, That expedition was called Bernadotte's White Buses. Most of the people from Ravensbrück were transported on white buses, but since we were a small camp, we were put on the white truck. Anyway, I keep telling, and I still, as I remember it, it felt like I wasn't there among them. It felt like I was standing aside and watching that scene, because we just could not comprehend that we are no longer in camp. And of course, we were suspicious of everybody, because right as we came, they took right away the sick ones to the hospital, and the rest of us, they took us for showers and gloves and disinfecting, and we were given clean clothes donated by the Swedish people. We didn't trust anybody. We wouldn't go into the shower. One from the personnel from the Red Cross had to go in and turn on the water to show us that it's real water. I don't know if I can convey to you how we really felt, even we were already outside the camp. And of course, the rest of us, they put up in a school, each one of us got a mattress, and I think there were paper sheets, soft paper sheets, but they felt luxurious. Even the things, the clothing donated by the Swedish people, after getting rid of those lice-infested garments, they felt like pure silk. But you see, at night, if you woke up, there was always somebody at the window looking out. We still couldn't believe that we're not in camp any longer. And a few days later, the students came running up the stairs in the middle of the night, yelling, "The war's over, the war's over." We, of course, didn't have any pajamas or nightgowns. We slept in our underwear, but who cared? We ran out, we hugged each other and jumped up and down, "The war's over." And of course, at that time, each one of us thought, since we survived, maybe somebody from the family did too. And as you know, the war was over, and I was left all alone. And as a matter of fact, I didn't speak about this for a long time. Not that I couldn't speak about the atrocities in camp, but I had a hard time when it came to speak about my family. And to this day, after so many years, I get quite emotional. So maybe some of you wonder why we do this, because after all, every time we talk about the Holocaust, it's like reliving the horrors of the past. But we are the only one that can bear witness, no matter how painful it is. And unfortunately, our number is diminishing. We are actually doing it in the memory of millions that were murdered by the Nazis, so that death was not in vain. We also have an obligation to them to fight for the prevention of crimes against humanity and against genocide. No one can fully describe, no matter how books were written, no one can describe the indescribable. We are just trying to convey to you what hate and racism and prejudice and bigotry and discrimination, brutality, and disregard for human lives can do. The Nazis had their collaborators, but they also were the bystanders. But we are trying to present you, don't be just a bystander. There's a quote that evil prevails when good people do nothing. I don't remember, it was a Jewish English author, you probably might know who said it. And there's also, as you leave the Holocaust Museum, a poem written by a German pastor. Martin Niemöller, who wrote that when they came for the socialists, I didn't speak up, I wasn't a socialist. Later, when they came for the Jews, I didn't speak up, I wasn't a Jew. But when they came for me, there was no one left to speak up. But people do have a choice to be good or evil. At the museum, we have a wall with names of people who risked their lives, not only their own lives, but lives of their families, to rescue and to save others. We call them the righteous Gentiles. And right now, there's so many atrocities still going on all over. There was Rwanda and Bosnia. Now we have Darfur in Sudan. And so many people are being murdered. So we impose on you, do speak up when you see injustice done. Fortunately, we live in a country that we do have a voice. As I mentioned yesterday to the students, we live in the most democratic country, the best country in the world, even with all its shortcomings. So we must use the lesson from the past and to try to prevent such crimes against humanity and genocide. The Jews used to have a slogan, never again, but never again no longer apply just to Jews. Our hope is that when you learn about the Holocaust, you do something to try to prevent another Holocaust to happen again. Thank you all for listening.
We have time for a few questions.
I have a question. You were 13 when you started. How many years were you?
Well, as I mentioned in the start, the war in Poland lasted almost 6 years. When the war ended, I was 19. Like I said yesterday to the kids, and the same to you, 19 is a mature person, right? But after 6 years of war, believe me, I came out not knowing where to go, not knowing what to do, and nobody to turn to. I didn't feel like a 19-year-old. But somehow I survived. The other day, one of the young kids asked me what I would say to Hitler if I met him. I would say to him, you see, you are dead, I'm still alive. But believe me, I never thought that I'm going to be 82 in December. I never thought I lived that long. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
How did you end up in the United States?
Oh, it's a long story, but it is. You see, being in Sweden, you people that were left in Germany, in the displaced person, in the camps, I think they had priority, but being in Sweden, I was considered a Polish citizen. So at that time, right after the war, there was a big demand from Polish people to come to the United States. And as you know, we do have a quota. So it took me 5.5 years to come to the United States. Yes?
Did you ever find any of your family, aunts, uncles?
For my extended family, which was quite a large one, because in those days there were large families, only one aunt and 4 cousins. Yes?
Did you marry and have children?
Yes, I have 2 children, only 1 grandson, which I really regret that I don't have more. Well, what can you do? By the way, I want to mention, usually I'm asked about my friend that was so sick. She did survive. At first, I didn't, you see, people ask me how we found out who was alive or not. Because right after the war, all kinds of lists and things from the Jewish organization, the Red Cross, and so appeared, who survived, who was looking for somebody. For some time, I haven't heard from her. So besides mourning, my parents, I also felt very bad about her. But eventually, I heard from her. She was in Germany. And she lives now in Israel. She survived. I visited her about 6 times. She was here once. But she wrote me at that time that she went to see the doctor that's another story. Do we have time?
Sure.
How do you feel? I mean, you had a long day. I said in the beginning I wasn't going to lecture, but at the end I still lectured you about things to do. Well, anyway, the thing was, people asked how she was on the sanitary, she was sick, in Lager you were not supposed to be sick. If you couldn't work, that was the end. Actually, our first doctor that we had in Lager, Jewish, also a Frenchman, was sent away because one of the women bore a child in camp. She came to camp, she was married, she came to camp pregnant, and they somehow were hiding this. The doctor did not report her. So the first doctor and the Jewish camp leader and the woman, as a matter of fact, the camp leader, the German camp leader, called her home and took the newborn baby, threw it against the wall, and they were all deported. So then we had a second doctor, also a Frenchman, but he was so nice. He would risk his life if they knew that he had somebody that kept somebody that had a high temperature. But he usually would report, since we were so important and working with soot, we often got, if we got a scratch or so, it was often infected, He would report that she has an infection, He didn't report. He took a great risk. So after the war, since she survived, she looked him up and went to France to see him. When he saw her, he didn't believe. He said it was a miracle that she survived. But miracles do happen, I guess. So that was the other doctors took a great risk to save her and this infirmary. Yes, sir.
Could you briefly tell about how you met your husband and your husband's experience during the war?
Well, my husband came from East Russia, East Poland, I'm sorry, already getting too emotional. And so when in the beginning, that was the concept, that the war will, if it be a war, it will be just men. Women won't be touched. They assumed that it was like during the First World War. As a matter of fact, when I was in school, we had a chart on the wall. We were contributed every week like 5 cents to buy gas masks because they thought it's going to be like the First World War. Anyway, he and his father escaped to Russia. Later, he joined, there was in the Russia a woman, and she was actually a Pole, but she was a communist, and she formed a Polish army. And he belonged to the Polish army. Came back with a chest of medals. He was only 17 years old when he went there. Anyway, that's how he survived. And his father, and of course his mother, being left in Poland with his sister. Anything else you want? I said to you that you wanted me to repeat. I don't remember.
Oh, from
Yes.
what city in Poland did you live in?
At the end, when the war started,
where were you born?
where I was born, it's called Khmelnik. Actually, if I spell it for you, none of you could pronounce it.
Okay, probably
Because
not.
I have it and I
It's
have
okay.
it. Nobody ever pronounced it.
It's okay.
The CH you pronounce different than we. Same Polish.
What is
Khmelnik.
it near?
It was near Kielce.
Okay.
Kielce was the largest city. Later we lived in Sosnowitz, which
Okay.
is near Chorzów, Katowice, called Oberschlesia. Anybody else? Yeah.
If you don't mind, I know it's difficult, but can you explain how long and when you found out about your parents? How you found out what happened?
Oh, I told you that, so you make me talk about it. You see, you have to be careful what you say, even to a close friend. She gets you sometimes in trouble. I mentioned I was 6 times in Israel. And usually when I got to Israel, they had, from that small town, they had an organization that they would get together, whoever was remained, you know. And of course, at the beginning, we talked about the good old times, you know. But when Holocaust survivors get together, no matter what you talk about, you always wind up talking about the Holocaust, you know. And we were talking there, and he was telling, when we were talking there, then I met somebody, another gentleman walked over, and I recognized him right away. He was a friend of my parents. And of course, his wife was perished also during the Holocaust. He remarried, and he was telling her all the things about me when I was a young girl and all that. And then he took me aside and said, there's somebody here that was on the same transport as your parents. To tell you the truth, at first I kind of hesitated if I want to go and see him, if I want really to find out how they died. Because sometimes you wonder, maybe it's even worse than I imagined, but what could have been worse? Finally I said, yes, we go. On the next day we went to visit him. He lived in a different city. He was telling us about, because they stayed in the ghetto until they liquidated the ghetto, till the end of the ghetto, and he was telling us about the ghetto, how it was, that one day, because through the ghetto you had to leave, you had somebody, you couldn't just leave the ghetto, you had some militiamen leading you out or in. So when all the people went to work, the children and the old people were all taken. And when those people came back from work and they found their relatives were gone, so were taken. And in the meantime, I was getting already, even listening to that, I was getting impatient. I wanted to get to the main subject, what he wanted to tell about. Anyway, finally he told me that he was on the transport with my parents. When they got to Auschwitz, they separated my father and the older boy to one side, and my mother with the younger boy to the other side. But father didn't want to be separated ever soon. So he passed over to that line where mother and the younger boy was. And that line was destined for the gas chamber. And of course, at first I was furious at my father why he did that, because after they wouldn't have a chance maybe to survive. But I also recalled later, a moment later, how it was at home. You see, for some reason, my parents married for love. And those days was very unusual. And also the fact that they came from different backgrounds. They had to fight something. And they were telling, you know, mother and father used to joke how they met. And I was even telling somebody, the big thing she wanted to punish him was he used to work somewhere near a window, that she didn't walk by in front of the window for him to see her. That was the big punishment, you know. And as being a young girl, it was so impressive to me. We constantly asked them to tell us the story about their courtship, you know. And then I realized that probably since they married for love, they didn't want to be separated. Okay, thank you so much. As I mentioned in the beginning, keep up the good work. It's not easy to teach the Holocaust, but we have to do it. Not for our own reason, but for your reason. Thank you.